First of all, who am I? I am a advocate. I work for an organization here in Sacramento, California, where I'm located. As a DAFI and SART advocate, I have been training on trauma, trafficking, and LGBTQ plus fluency since about 2017. And I'm queer. I am honored and so grateful to be a part of this webinar. I have been in every single session, and I can say without hesitation that I am so glad that I was able to do that and to participate. I've seen so much participation. I love that. I am excited about that. I hope I get lots of participation and questions as well. I welcome that. And in addition, because if we sort of look at the percentages of LGBTQ plus people in population, I might be one of the few LGBT people, one of the few queer people that you have an opportunity to participate intimately like this. So it's a brave space. I am open to any kinds of questions, especially in the LGBTQ plus actual section of the presentation. I really hope that you will ask just anything and everything that you want to know. In terms of group agreements, I am happy. I'm professionally gay. I'm a trainer. So if you want to quote me directly, that is fine. Otherwise, confidentiality in terms of personal sharing that people do, I think is important. Please drop in the chat if you have any comments about anything else that you'd like the group to participate in. But that being said, as I'm waiting to see if anyone has anything to say extra, I'm going to go ahead and continue. Oh, I did want to mention, I know that my nearest installation is Beale Air Force Base in Yuba County. That's more than an hour from where I live and where my nonprofit is. We do have a reserve installation in Sacramento itself with limited hours, but my nearest base is more than an hour away. So this is directly from NOVA. You've seen this on everybody's slide presentation. This is what I personally am going to address in this presentation. So the next 5 slides are all about the history of LGBTQ plus people in the military. And before I go through that, I'm not going to read everything, but I want to give you an overview of that history as part of laying the foundation for what we're talking about. But before I go into that, that's cute, Angel. Thank you. I want to just give a quote that I heard that President Biden did in Normandy recently, just a few days ago, because it really struck me, not only in its sense of inclusion, but you'll see also in the sense of who was left out. So he said, every soldier who stormed the beach, who dropped by parachute or landed by glider, every sailor who manned the thousands of ships and landing craft, every aviator who destroyed German-controlled airfields, bridges, and railroads, all were backed by other brave Americans, including hundreds of thousands of people of color and women who courageously served despite unjust limitations on what they could do for their nation. So I love his shout out to the history of discrimination against people of color and women in the military. And obviously LGBTQ plus people who have also have this legacy of discrimination were left out. And we know that there have always been LGBTQ plus people serving in the military. So fun fact, one of the very first generals that was brought into the US Army from Prussia was an open secret homosexual. And then almost immediately after that, from the very, very first year of the formation of the US military, Lieutenant Enslin was drummed out of the Continental Army, court-martialed and drummed out of the Army for being gay. The US military continued to discharge soldiers for being gay even though there wasn't an explicit prohibition against sodomy, but they moved the goalpost. So anybody who works with oppressed populations or who is part of a marginalized group, you know that that is one of the ways that oppression is perpetuated, is by you never really know what you have to do in order to belong. So that was the history of the military for quite a few years, for more than 200 years. And it can be overwhelming to think about the long history of this kind of discrimination, but the good news is that we are on a different path. For, depending on how you measure it, 20 to 30 years or so, there has been a concerted effort toward inclusion of gay people in the military. So that is the good news. Now, prior to 1949, there was this sort of sodomy, court-martial, dishonorable discharge. You have no sound? You can't hear me?
We can hear you,
Oh,
Karen.
okay. I
Nancy,
saw.
do you want to message with our tech team? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to check in, see if it was universal. So then there started to be a shift between people who were caught having homosexual conduct and people who were merely suspected or talked about being homosexual. And just keep in mind that until 1944, all of these regulations applied to men only. And in 1944, of course, there was an influx of women right before that. And that was codified as well, that women who were LGBTQ were also subject to these discriminations. So it just kind of got worse from there. It was codified that nobody who was homosexual should be able to serve at all. There was this concerted effort to keep homosexuals out of the military. And then in 1950, there was this further codification. The Vietnam War came right after that, and then the World Wars. And so because bodies were needed, there was sort of that informal don't ask, don't tell that's kind of happened during those years. But homosexuals who were caught doing conduct were still given that undesirable or dishonorable discharge, whereas if you were just suspected, you could receive a regular sort of general discharge. But that discrimination, continued to be the norm. So this is 1981. So now we are up to, what is history for most of us. I was graduating from high school in 1981. So this is the statement that was in the Department of Defense directive in January of 1981 that starts with homosexuality is incompatible with military service. And so there was this idea that it was a moral judgment and that people who wanted to genuinely serve their country were not allowed to exercise the full rights of citizenship in order to join the armed forces. So this was a very, very strong statement about the unsuitability of LGBTQ plus people to serve in the military. And when I read things like this, I actually am just, heartbroken at what it must have been like to live under these prohibitions. So now I'm going to play a video. It's a very short video. It's from the Air Force. And just so you know, when you get the slides, anything that's underlined is an active link. So for this video, it links directly to the Air Force site from which I downloaded it.
1982. The U.S. Department of Defense releases a policy stating that homosexuality is incompatible with military service. In the following years, 1988, a joint report conducted by the DoD and the Defense Personnel Security Research and Education Center claimed claiming that gay and lesbian individuals enlisted in the armed forces pose no significant risk to security. 1993. President Bill Clinton signs the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, barring openly gay and lesbian American citizens from military service, while prohibiting harassment of all closeted military service members. 2011. Clinton's Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy is repealed by the Obama administration. In spring 2015, members of the transgender community come out publicly, garnering major media attention. In June, the military equal opportunity policy has been modified to include gay and lesbian service members. Later in July, the Secretary of Defense Carter issues a directive which says that no service member can be discharged on the grounds of gender identity. In 2016, Eric Fanning became the 22nd Secretary of the Army, the largest service branch of the U.S. military, and the first openly gay head of any service in the U.S. military. In July 2017, President Trump announces that the United States government will not accept or allow transgender individuals to serve in any capacity of the U.S. military. Later that year, in December, a second federal judge rules against Trump's transgender military ban. The Department of Justice continues to appeal the ruling. March 2021, Biden releases an executive order that permits troops to serve openly under their self-identified gender and will offer access to medical treatments for gender transition. Throughout history, brave LGBTQ+ soldiers and civilians have served and fought for our nation. The Army's commitment to LGBTQ+ service members extends by putting people first, no matter their race, identity, or gender.
So we are up to the present, and I love that there is this policy of inclusion, but we have more than 200 years of discrimination, and we have less than 20 years of openness. So that is the foundation where we start to look at the impacts of that long history of discrimination. So one of the things that's really poignant is that anybody who did receive a dishonorable discharge during those years of discrimination, they have to have their discharge revised in order to access full rights and benefits. So that means somebody who was subjected to Agent Orange and dishonorably discharged, for just to give you an example. So that they have to take that step themselves in order to have their discharge revised. And that is very, very difficult. And so we're talking about a lot of our older service members and veterans that are continuing to suffer from previous discrimination. Things like that our spouses, our families and dependents of anybody who is LGBTQ in the service, they were only allowed full access to benefits in 2013. Now, if we're talking about the impact of discrimination and the stress, especially maybe during the Don't Ask, Don't Tell years and prior to that, hiding who you are and then being assaulted, that only compounds the stress of the assault. So you now have the toxic stress of having a hidden lifestyle, and then you've been assaulted, especially we know for men, men who are assaulted, especially sexually. So now they have to reveal that there's been an assault, and that is directly and intimately connected with something that they may have been not comfortable with. And of course, if you report, not just for men, but for anyone, there is always that chance that just reporting is going to highlight some sexual information about their history. So that is also complicated if you have two people in the military possibly in 2 different units. And then you have the differing loyalties of command. We'll talk about the different kinds of reporting a little bit later, as I know you have, already gotten an overview of that. But all of these things are ongoing ways that people continue to be impacted by the long history of discrimination in the service. So I am looking at a question about a guesstimate on intermilitary discrimination currently. So I have only anecdotal information about that, where it is very dependent on the command for that particular unit or battalion or all the other words that I'm not familiar with in the other branches of the service. So because leadership could very well be from the generation that did have codified discrimination against LGBTQ plus people, it's going to be very individualized from what I understand. So it's very new that these things are being codified against discrimination, but that is balanced by this long history of discrimination that we're still, trying to access for people. So I know you've heard a lot about the unique features of military life. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but when you're in a marginalized community, like you're LGBTQ plus, and in the military or attached to the military connected through a spouse or a parent, that compounds these things like isolation, like the fact that your community could be dependent on living on a base or by the socialization that happens within other people that are connected to military life. I know that Major McCrary Davis talked about that if you're a parachute packer, for example, there are only 4 bases that you can go to. So again, just imagine that you are in this subset of people. You're a parachute packer and LGBTQ plus, so it narrows your options even further because of the fact that all the individuals in the military, within this hierarchy, within this very rigid structure, they're bringing who they are into that structure. So if the leadership has feelings about LGBT people being allowed to serve, remember this is very, very recent, there's been struggles to integrate all the populations like that Brian talked about, people of color and women. So again, dealing with gender-based violence and then adding the impact of LGBTQ plus on top of that. These are not unique to anybody who's assaulted and military connected, but being LGBTQ plus simply compounds some of these things. Again, that fear of reporting, that idea that you're part of this group and you need to be a cohesive but also act on your own, and how that interacts with people making choices about serving, even though there's a recognition of these biases and these discriminations that were previously very, very evident in the military. So I want to talk a little bit about survivors' rights. So anybody who is assaulted has the right to report and get counseling and medical services through the military. And that is true for anybody military connected. So a military survivor or those spouses and those dependents. And that support is 24 hours. I do have a resource page at the end of the presentation that you'll have access to. And a lot of this information, is on Military OneSource. And those of us who are civilian supporters, civilian advocates, that has been an invaluable resource to me for finding out how to get somebody connected if they want military support. So I just want to do a little thought experiment. This is something that I engaged in as I was making this presentation. So we know that there are about 1.4 million people who are active duty. And we know that about 230,000 of those are women. We know, these are statistics that are widely available, that there are about 14.5 million veterans. So people who are no longer active duty, but are able to receive services. And then you have your military connected people who could have a right to access these services. So that's exponential, increasing these numbers. So I made, again, this is a thought experiment. The statistics that I said, these are numbers, those are correct and true and widely available. After that, I'm guesstimating. So I guesstimated that there could be around 2.5 million people who identify as LGBTQ+ who are military connected. And if we look at percentages, again, part of the thought experiment of people who might experience domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, harassment, that could be as many as 600,000 people at any given time. So we as advocates can expect to encounter somebody who is military connected during our advocacy. And it is potentially a large number of people that are going to be seeking services for these types of assaults. So this is vital work that we are doing to figure out how to navigate what it's like to be LGBTQ+ and associated with the military. So that's why, I know a lot of people have mentioned this, but that's why these partnerships between civilian organizations and military organizations are so crucial, because we know that these people, any one of these 600,000 people, especially depending on where the assault took place, if it took place off base, they have lots and lots of ways to report and receive support through civilian organizations. So it's really, really crucial that we start understanding that there are different needs for LGBTQ+ people that are military connected, and that we might very well see them in civilian organizations seeking services. So there's lots and lots of things available through the military, and there's lots and lots of things available through civilian channels. Now, in my area, and I was surprised to learn that it was different in other places in the United States, but in my area, survivors who report through civilian channels have the ability to choose an acute versus a VAWA exam. An acute exam is referred from law enforcement, and that is going to generate a report. A lot of areas do VAWAs by default. Our area, we do acute by default. So most of our exams are acute exams, and VAWAs are the exception. So the reason I'm talking about that is because we want to support survivors with the level of reporting that they want to do. So if they want to make a full report to civilian or military law enforcement, we want to support them to do that. But a VAWA exam is a very good way, kind of similar to the unrestricted versus restricted reporting, where it doesn't trigger that official investigation and command involvement. So we're going to talk a little bit more about restricted and unrestricted, but just know that in all of these things, whether we're talking about, protective orders, whether we're talking about exams, there is almost always a way that we can figure out, listen to what the survivor wants, and provide them with the right level of services based on what they want to disclose and who that they want to disclose to. This is a mix of talking about sexual assault and domestic assault survivors. We know already that the Family Advocacy Program works for domestic violence. So there is a lot of resources, but again, who your survivor is, whether they are in the military or military connected, what their choices are all going to affect which rights that they want to and can take advantage of. So let's talk a little bit about some of the military procedures. So I wanted to highlight reporting is always survivor-led. It should always be survivor-led. I was talking to a friend of mine who is in the military, and she was talking about family readiness groups. So for those of you who don't know, family readiness groups in each unit of the Army are connected to command, and they are specifically for like significant others of the military member. So it can be a great resource for bonding with and receiving support during a crisis or otherwise with other people who are military connected. However, as we know, sometimes that confidentiality can be breached in those type of situations when you are talking to a group of people. So all of these resources and supports have both an upside and a downside. And we want to listen and try to protect the survivor's rights to report and to disclose, even to disclosing their LGBTQ+ status. We want to make sure that the survivor is leading that process and really in charge of how much they're disclosing and what type of information they're disclosing. So I know other people have talked in great detail about restricted versus unrestricted reporting. I have a brief description here. A restricted report is like a VAWA. It maintains confidentiality. It doesn't take it that next step, and it gives the survivor that time to decide whether or not they want to take the step to report and get access to some of the other services that are available once you make that restricted report. So the one thing that I want to talk about and that I do have experience and expertise with is the way that restricted reporting and unrestricted reporting intersect with civilian services and support. So if somebody wants to make a restricted report within the military structure and receive the services that they can receive, it's very important that they understand how what they do on the civilian side is going to impact that. Because somebody who makes a report themselves to law enforcement, civilian law enforcement, they are not able to then have a restricted report. And if they want to have a restricted report through the military, they cannot be the one that reports to civilian agencies. Now, there are definitely situations where an emergency room personnel or a counselor or something of that, these people are mandated reporters, and they could make a report of an assault. In that case, the military connected survivor can still do a restricted report. But as advocates, that is one of the things that, I want to be able to counsel somebody on in terms of making a good decision for themselves. And of course, somebody who's not in the military is a military connected survivor is going to have, different services available. Somebody who is active military, active duty is going to have different services available versus somebody who is reserve, in the National Guard. They might not have access to full judicial procedures. They might not have access to like the family advocacy program. So these are things that I read all the military procedures and get a little overwhelmed. And that's why making these partnerships with our counterparts, exactly, so many facets to reporting. And so I know that I want to be able to bond with my counterparts in the military so that I have really good information in order to give to the survivors that I'm supporting. And I just want to highlight something that Dr. Gray said yesterday, which is there is new procedures for these family members that they do not have to find a military base. Remember, my closest military base is an hour or so away, Yuba City, and it's Air Force. That does not mean that my military connected survivors who are in the Army, who are in the Coast Guard, who are in the Space Force, they can still receive services at that base. So I learned so much through other people's presentations that I'm now, kind of elevating for you as well. So resources outside the military. So we provide free or low cost counseling at our agencies, which is the only rape crisis center. We have safe housing at our agencies. That's also connected to some of the other local agencies that we have. Faith-based. Yes, thank you, Costell. Reporting is also really different in the active duty versus reserve. Food banks, somebody else mentioned that when talking about rural populations, they're often connected to agencies that provide other types of basic needs like toiletries and support of clothing for specifically unhoused population, which we know, sadly, a lot of our veterans are homeless, unhoused population. And then we have these population-specific nonprofits. Does your town or your area have an LGBTQ plus center? Do you have a trans health clinic? So I like to think that we can be creative in terms of finding resources for anybody who might have an unusual need, something that I haven't come across, something that I haven't thought of. Our agency maintains a database support that I can access online when I'm in an exam. I can access anytime that I need it. I have my counterparts in the Family Justice Center, which does kind of the same things that we do. However, they also provide a workshop for filling out a request for a TRO for these civilian restraining orders. So these things like civilian restraining orders and how they intersect with military protective orders, really good to have these counterparts so that we understand like, oh, it's only enforceable on the base in which it was generated. So it's of no use if the person moves to another jurisdiction. We've seen over and over again that moving, traveling, sometimes to another country, is one of the things that impacts military connected survivors greatly, because you're always having to rebuild. So at least knowing that there are these sort of built-in places where survivors can get support in many, many areas, sometimes robustly. I live in a pretty large area, city, so I have a lot of resources available. And even so, there's times when heartbreakingly, I cannot find what somebody needs, or it takes me longer than I would like it to. So can you think of any other resources that LGBTQ plus survivors are going to need, and where you could access that in your area? I love to learn. So if there's something that's missing from this list, I would love to know what y'all are doing to connect to resources outside of the military. So I'll just pause for a second and see whether somebody has something. Legal resources, yes, we do, as well as the Family Justice Center. Huge campus. Oh, that's a great one. Campus resources for LGBTQ universities, someone else mentioned. I love that. Thank you. That was definitely missing from my list. So you might notice support groups. Thank you, Chrissy. Very useful, especially in California. We have, oh, awesome, Pride outreach events in Georgia. I love it. You know, I have traveled a lot to St. Louis, to Georgia, and contrary to my bias going into those southern locations, there are resources for LGBTQ plus people. I was so happy to see that. So contrary to many of my slides, in fact, I think all of my slides until this one, you'll notice that these are all questions. And that is because I found myself with a lot of questions when I was, oh, thank you. Thank you for the Michigan agencies. I was like, okay, we've got this population that wants to serve, that is embedded in the military or has a common factor of military involvement, who is subjected to violence, either through another military member or through somebody in the civilian population. And they have to confront that their command might have anti-gay bias. They might have been hiding their status in their unit. And how do we find creative ways to continue the supportive codification and systems that are currently happening within the military? I don't know about you, some advocates don't do this, but I actually watch a lot of Law and Order SVU. I find it interesting, and I always write them letters if they do something like use a term like child prostitute. 12-step programs, awesome, thank you. So there was an episode recently in Law and Order SVU that was titled Duty to Hope. There's also a quote by Jeanette Winterson that talks about that. And as I went into this slide and had so many questions about how we can navigate this complex maze of wanting to support survivors, wanting to protect them from what they want to disclose and how much they want to report, long history of bias in the military, wanting to elevate and maintain and keep their privacy around their military service if that's their stated desire. I really just got struck by that phrase, a duty to hope. And I just wanted to bring that into the conversation right now. I get a little teary-eyed sometimes talking about things like that, because I feel like whether I'm serving an individual survivor or whether I'm talking about systems like I am now, that is my responsibility, is to continue to have a duty to hope for better. And that's what I want to bring to you, is that even though we are in this transition period, we don't necessarily know where we're going. We may have a new administration that, just like Trump did from 2016 to 2021, could change things in terms of codification in the military. We can still uplift hope for our survivors and continue to work through these partnerships on systemic change and managing change for survivors. So if anybody wants to drop in tips that respond to these questions, but I believe that questions are where we start, and curiosity is where we start in looking at how we can work together to keep things safe for all survivors, and specifically for these LGBTQ plus survivors of assault. So just pause for a second. One of the things that I really thought about a lot, and that I just want to kind of uplift when we're talking about these systems, is, oh, that's such a good one. Asking survivors what can be done better. Absolutely. So as we go through these systems change, remember, we have since 2011 that LGBTQ plus people were allowed to openly serve. as we go through this transition period, as we try to change systems, as we know from civil rights struggles and all the times of big systems change, sometimes somebody is sacrificed on the altar of change. We know that. So how do we hold the needs and the rights of one individual survivor with the benefits to survivors of changing a system? And of course, that is up to an individual survivor. But I know I've gotten myself into situations that I agreed to wholeheartedly and then had no idea what I was facing. So this is hard stuff. And the people that choose and have chosen to break these barriers, to come out, to insist on their rights, we know that they sometimes pay a high price. So this is one that I really, really find just very poignant, is how do we do both those things? How do we use these partnerships, civilian military partnerships, to continue to advocate for systemic change and protect a survivor's privacy, an individual's right to privacy, and allowing that one person to get the services that they are entitled to. So I'm going to take a deep breath and move on to kind of how we do build those partnerships, because I think they are crucial for continuing systemic change. So I did include in the resources a very, very good study that was undertaken by an LGBTQ+ organization that talks specifically about the process that they went through in order to create the CCR, and has some very good step-by-step instructions, some of the pitfalls, some of the things that are difficult. And I also want to elevate that Ava, right after me, is going to do a deep dive into this. So this is an overview. And I do want to also point out that these types of collaborations can be informal, can be just, hey, Nancy, I've got a survivor and I need this. Or they can be agency to agency or agency to military installation with these MOUs and such. So I just don't want you to dismiss the value of informal partnerships. All of the ways that we connect and build these relationships between agencies and between the military and civilians, these allow us to do these warm handoffs, to have an overlap in services, to make sure that somebody's unique needs are being served. So right now, you guys may or may not know, sorry, I shouldn't say guys, y'all, all of us, may know that covering all avenues, exactly, Raymond, we don't know what an individual survivor might need. And so the more partnerships that we have, the more likely it is we're going to be able to cover what they need. So those of you who are engaged in kind of political activism or are in leadership in your agency, you might know that VOCA, the Victims of Crime Act, has just been cut almost 45%. So we are finding it crucial to have these community partnerships and recognize that our role and our continuing ability to serve survivors might depend on being able to hold somebody off, hand somebody off to a different agency. We don't know what the impact of the cuts are here in California. We have a bill in front of the governor right now, 2 bills actually, as well as a budget that has some backfill money to make up for the VOCA cuts. But it's not a secret to any of us who work in this that we rely on a patchwork of money in order to continue our roles. So again, I just want to emphasize that it is crucial to build these partnerships. And as we build these partnerships, it is very, very crucial to understand how to have a healthy partnership. And that could mean agreeing to disagree. So I know because of this long history of discrimination in the military, there is some suspicion in the LGBTQ plus community about the military. So it is not our first choice to reach out to a military advocate. And I have to put my own biases aside if that is what somebody needs. We have different language, we have different ways of serving the survivor, different things that we prioritize in terms of what we think is important. And if we go into a partnership without curiosity and without a recognition that we're all here to serve survivors better, that's our commonality. And when we're talking about military connected survivors, whether they are the military partner and they've been assaulted, or whether it's the military connected dependent or significant other that's been assaulted, attachment to the military is what we all have in common when we are serving these survivors. So I just think it's really, really crucial that we continue to have these conversations and build these partnerships with transparency, with an understanding of who's responsible for what, not stepping on other people's toes, and really just coming to these partnerships with humility, transparency, and curiosity. Does anybody else have anything that they want to add? I know, again, Ava is going to do a deep dive into this, so you can hold your comments till then if you would like. Okay. So I'm now going to jump ahead and focus specifically on how we serve individuals who are military connected and are military, who are LGBTQ plus and military connected. So I want you to, again, remember, brave space. All questions are on the table. Nobody's going to judge you for anything that you ask. This is your chance to learn from somebody who's not in trauma. I'm here to try to build that bridge so that the next LGBTQ plus survivor that you see who's military connected, that you, I hope, if you already have a good foundation, yay. I am not the be all and end all, and I hope that you will share your expertise. But this is your chance to ask all those questions that are specific and not that sort of general structure. And it's just about meeting that unique person who's in front of us. And I think it was Dr. Poe in a previous session that talked about survivors are just people that are trying to do their job. And one of the resources that I have on my resource page is Jennifer Eberhard's book, which focuses primarily on law enforcement, but it's called Bias. And I recognize that I have biases. I recognize going in front of an individual survivor that I might share a lot of common elements with them or pretty much none. And my job is to serve and elevate what that survivor requests, what they need, what they say they want in any given situation. And so that's what I think it means to do the job of advocacy, is meeting the person in front of me, whether I share a background with them, whether I like their lifestyle or not, to recognize their innate humanity and listen to them. So we've had a lot of slides with a lot of words. So now I've got a picture. There are other ways that this is represented. There are charts and graphs with no picture. There is the genderbread person, which is very, very similar to this. But this is a great graphic for understanding all the ways. Sometimes people get confused. Some people conflate gender identity and gender expression. Sometimes people conflate sex and gender identity. So this is a really great representation because everybody has a gender identity, everybody has a sexual orientation, and for many, many of you, not me, but for many of you, that might be very seamless. You might have been assigned the gender at birth, the sex at birth that you still consider to be your gender identity. That's called cisgender, or cis for short. Oh, awesome, Kelly. I love that. Drop it in the chat if you want to share it with people. So if your gender identity is the same as your sex assigned at birth, you're cis, you're cisgender. That's just a term that says those two things are the same. There are lots and lots of ways that these all can intersect. So if you're looking at yourself, sometimes it can be a fun exercise to just answer these questions for yourself. So for me, I'm genderqueer. So in the gender identity piece, that would be other genders. My gender expression could be one day, could be another the other day. So I often, because I was socialized as a woman in the South, well, in Texas, which some people consider the South, I often present in somewhat feminine dress. And then I face my gender identity not being recognized. I get called she a lot, and it sometimes is lovely as an opportunity to educate someone in front of me, not a survivor, of course, but a checkout person or a wait staff. And I was assigned female at birth. I am physically attracted. I consider myself queer, so I kind of have a wide range of attraction. My spouse is trans. I've also been with people who identify as lesbian and consider themselves women. I'm emotionally attracted pretty much to anyone who was socialized as female. I don't have a lot of romantic attachments with people who were socialized as male or who are assigned male at birth and consider them cis males. So that's mine. I think it's fun to kind of revise this or go through this. It's also a really fun graphic. If your job entails helping somebody to feel supported around their, thank you, Karen, I love that. If they need help in order to start thinking about this for themselves, especially some of our older population, they may not know that we now have this range of expression and identities available to us. So just a fun graphic. Like I said, there's lots and lots of other ones. If you want something a little more dry, there's lots of sort of charts that don't have a picture available to them. Does anyone have any questions about these things before we go on? Okay, so pansexual, that's a great question, Amanda. That would go under physically attracted to. Pan means all. So that is somebody that might not even resonate with the term bisexual because they might want to include people who are trans, people who are non-binary, people who are intersex, and where bisexual, sometimes people think, oh, that means men and women. So somebody who is pansexual is attracted to all of the points on the gender identity spectrum. Great question. Thank you, Wendy. How does queer differ from gay? It's really terminology. For me, I like the term queer. It was such a derogatory term for many years, whereas gay tended to refer to men. Men identified as gay for a long time. Thank you mentioning Miley Cyrus. Absolutely. So I like reclaiming the term queer. I would hesitate in using it unless somebody has used it because it does have a pretty long history of it being a derogatory term. So gay came out as a term specifically for men, although women certainly do use it. Lesbian tends to be the term for women who specifically have romantic and or physical attraction to other women. and queer tends to sort of be that umbrella terminology that I like to reclaim for I'm attracted to all kinds of people, and I am a weird gender identity that doesn't fit into men and women. Thank you, Wendy. These are great questions. I love this. Yes. So intersex. So we have this section here called assigned at birth, sex assigned at birth. And that happens when your doctor, your midwife, or if you happen to be alone giving birth, looks at the baby in front of you and you say, oh, this child has a penis, he must be a boy, a male. Or this person doesn't have a penis, they have what looks like a vagina and a clitoris, so they must be a female. So then you get your sex assigned at birth. So intersexed can show up in any kind of way. It could be ambiguous genitalia, where the person looking at that baby is like, oh, it's not quite a penis, but it's larger than a clitoris. So maybe this is an intersect person. Or intersex can show up after somebody has been socialized because of their sex assigned at birth and what was seen visually at birth. And then through chromosomal testing, sometimes that happens due to specific cancers or other diseases where they end up having some chromosomal testing. And then they find out, oh, wow, I have chromosomes on the hormonal level that are different from what I was assigned at birth. Maybe that's an explanation for how I've always felt like it didn't quite conform to the female or the male identity that I was assigned. So intersex can show up right at birth by somebody looking physically at a baby and saying, oh, there's ambiguous genitalia, this is an intersex person. Or it can show up later in life when hormone or chromosomal testing shows that the person who is living as a female or a male actually has chromosomal or hormonal characteristics of the opposite gender. I hope that answered your question. Any other questions? Oh gosh, Wendy, I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad that I'm here to answer your questions. It doesn't require any patience at all. I love the participation, because if you're asking this question, if you're being brave enough to ask this question, guaranteed there are others that either don't type as fast or didn't quite know how to formulate the question. So I am so glad that these questions are answered. Thank you. Thank you, Emily. So back in the day, as we were just starting to understand that there was more on the gender spectrum than a man and a woman at opposite poles, people started to want to differentiate from he and she. So I use they pronouns. I find that there is some pushback. People are like, they is a plural pronoun. And then I like to point out, well, you know, if you are driving in traffic and somebody cuts you off, you say, ah, they just cut me off. They meaning that one car driven by that one person. So we do that. And I'm comfortable using they. The range of pronouns like ze, zir, and some of the other ones came about kind of before people proposed they. And it was a way to have something that wasn't she, that wasn't he. I used to, when I was first starting to use different pronouns, I would put just an S in parentheses if I was writing it, and then he, so that it was like not a Z, it was a sh, he. Then, like I said, they got popularized and I found myself comfortable with that. But Z-zir and the various spellings, that's one spelling. I've also seen it Z-E and Z-I-R. And a range of other ones came about through specialized populations saying, this is what I want to be called. So if somebody wants to use an unusual pronoun, Our job as advocates can be to elevate that, to correct that, if an examiner misgenders them or law enforcement doesn't use that. But there is a proliferation of unusual pronouns that somebody and some community decided, I want to use this as an alternative to she and he. So they really just came out. Yes, thank you, Nancy. Exactly. We already use they. All right. Thank you so much for your great questions. I'll continue to monitor the chat. Oh, here we go. Okay, so responding, supporting an individual who's not supported by their family or friends. Yes, it definitely happens. So as much as we might be facing somebody who doesn't feel like they're going to get support in their unit or their battalion because of their expression, their gender expression, or their identity, or their sexual orientation, that is going to happen with family as well. And I have said so many different things to people. I start with, you deserve support. You're not alone. I'm sorry you're not getting support from the people that say they love you. I'm sorry that you're not getting support from your family. And then we talk about, how can I support you dealing with that pain? And how can I provide resources that are going to account for that lack of support in these other areas? Because that's just the reality. And it might be the reality even for survivors that are far away from their families physically. So it's a pain to be far away from a family, whether that's physically or emotionally. And all I can do is empathize, validate how painful that is, and offer them my support and the support of the services and the agencies that I'm connected to. I hope that helped. Thank you, Emily. So it's not that any of these things are unique necessarily. Well, some of the pronoun stuff is a little bit later, but a lot of these things are needed by any survivor of any kind of trauma. And so I just want us to remember that listening and slowing down are connected. I like to think of it as actually a tool for me as much as it is for the survivor. So I show up at, 2, 3, 4, sometimes 0, but we get a lot of exams. So last month in May, for example, we had 68 SART or DAFI exams. I didn't support all of them, of course, but I never know who I'm going to be facing. I might have their name, I might have their birth date, I might have the agency that's bringing them in, but I know very, very little about that survivor. So I'm walking into a room, my nervous system is activated because I want to do my job, I want to do a good job and support them, and I don't know who I'm facing. So slowing down and listening is that adjustment period. And it allows both of us, I'm continually told that I'm very, very calm in an exam. And that's my kind of superpower, is having that presence and having that calm, listening curiosity in order to just be there. Like, I have to be in the room and ready before I can actually listen. So these are starting to look at some of the very specific trauma-informed questions that might come into play when you're facing a military-connected LGBTQ+ survivor. So what name would you like me to use? Very, very crucial. Now, I don't know exactly how it works in the military and what the transition process is for somebody who is socially transitioning. But I know that our SART clinic is in a Sutter facility. And in Sutter, they have to be registered under their legal name. So if they have only socially transitioned or are using a gender neutral name instead of their legal name, they have to be registered under their legal name. And I want to make sure that they are addressed by law enforcement, by the examiner. Awesome. Thanks, Amanda. And myself are addressing them how they feel comfortable, because it's very jarring, especially for somebody in early transgender transition, to be constantly faced with somebody using what's called their dead name, being constantly referred to as a male name when they consider themselves female, or constantly referred reverse with a female name when they consider themselves male. So top question in early introductions, what name would you like to use? Absolutely, Earl. Ongoing consent, I need to ask you about, are you comfortable? What would you like me to enter on this form? So we can be that supportive presence of letting someone know that we're not judging, and we are here to help them make this process as easy as possible, and either support their privacy or support their efforts to disclose and come out in this circumstance. Now, that question, is there anything else I should know? That can specifically refer to safety in the military. If I'm somebody who's going to be communicating with their counterpart in the military, I want to know how they want me to talk about them. Do they want me to use that name that they've given me, or do they want me to use the name that they are currently enrolled in the military with? So very, very important to really protect somebody's privacy, to really understand that their access to services should not depend on how much they want to disclose. And again, as much as that's true for anybody, that can be crucial for an LGBTQ plus survivor in a military context. And then, of course, if it's part of your job, I think it's really good to get comfortable talking about body parts, because body parts are not gendered. If somebody has a vagina, they have a vagina. If somebody has a penis, they have a penis. And they might, in a sexual context, refer to that in a different way, but I don't have to say things like sex or women have. I can say a vagina has lots of folds, so the examiner is going to need to touch you. Are you comfortable with that? I don't have to say women have a lot of folds in their body parts, because that person may not identify with as a woman. So I think it's really, really crucial, if it's part of your job to have to talk about sexual assault, to get comfortable with talking about bodies and body parts. So I like to always pair don't do this with what you can do. So these are just some examples of some specific vulnerabilities that are likely to come up when you are supporting an LGBTQ plus survivor. And it's all part of kind of staying in your lane and not judging how anybody behaves versus how they identify, and not being afraid to jump in and ask these clarifying questions. So rather than deciding someone's pronoun, you can make pronouns, as somebody said, they've included that on their hotline. You can make that part of all medical forms, all of your agency registration forms. You can do that. It's easy. Maybe it doesn't apply to 90% of your people, but it's going to be invaluable for seeing somebody and making them feel safe, if that is something that they need. And it's really all, again, about not judging them and being present to what they say they need in this moment through this crisis, not what you think they need, but how can you support? How can I support? Oh, that's a great clarification. These are for everyone's privacy and comfort. Yeah, that's a great way to answer anybody who's like, of course I'm a man. look at me. Well, we just do this for everyone's presence and everyone's preference and comfort. That's really lovely. So again, especially when we are dealing with LGBTQ plus survivors who are military connected, who may not want to disclose their status, their sexual orientation to their military because they feel like they can't in order to preserve their military service. We can have a vibrant, robust network of civilian agencies in order to build that network and provide somebody the services they need without compromising what they say they want in terms of their military involvement. So these are my sort of bottom line elements of effective advocacy, and definitely the more trauma that somebody has experienced in their life. We know probably about the polyvictimization model. We know about ACEs. And so we are going to be present with that person, make sure that we listen and amplify what they are saying, talk directly to the survivor. I know that that is one of the ways that I advocate, is that I talk directly to the survivor rather than trying to get in between law enforcement or an examiner. Are you comfortable with that? Do you need a break? And so the examiner, the law enforcement, they're hearing that, but I'm not stepping on their toes. I'm speaking directly to the survivor as my job as an advocate. Provide the information that that the person has asked for. Provide it honestly and transparently. I don't know if I'm going to be able to find you a bed for tonight, but here's what I can do for you. That kind of honesty is just these little moments of building trust. So these are my final thoughts before we go into the scenario that we've been working with. So you will get this. I'm going to just highlight this one right here because, again, we are working with somebody who is in a unique hierarchical structure that has a tradition of discrimination. So we want to respect the disclosures, the desire not to disclose, and what that survivor wants, focusing on their needs and their right to access services, whatever they choose to disclose. Now, we know that certain things they're not going to be able to access unless they do that unrestricted report. We know that there are exceptions to this. And again, having these partnerships in the civilian world allows for the differences between how people want to be open or less open about their LGBTQ plus status within their military involvement. So here's our hypothetical. We know who Service Member Jones is. We've read about their family structure for quite some time. And we know that there has been a history of sexual and domestic violence in this relationship. So here's the new part. Jennifer and Service Member Jones are part of the LGBTQ plus community. Jennifer does not feel, probably rightfully in Alaska, that there's a big LGBTQIA plus community where they're located, and misses their community back home, probably feels, a lack of support and missing that support system. So let's talk about the questions. So do we now know what on-base services are available to Jennifer? I would love to see those in the chat, as well as some of the barriers that Jennifer might face in seeking on-base support and services related to that sexual assault. Sharp, that is one of the referrals that I have. Family, yep. Prejudice, yep, they might be facing somebody from that previous generation. Chaplain, really good is somebody who has a strong faith-based orientation. The biggest barrier is going to be that judgment from military personnel. I agree with you. That's what I've heard anecdotally for sure. ACS, I don't know that one. I would love it if you spelled that out. FAP for sure. I know that one. Chaplain. Shame and being judged. Yes, especially for men. Unfortunately, especially because it was layered onto military service, that these people were unsuitable, they would weaken the team. There can be a huge barrier to men supporting, especially if it requires them to come out or to be tangentially connected to their identity as gay. Army Community Service, thank you. All right, some of those are going to continue to come in, I'm sure. Thank you. Let's talk about what types of military civilian partnerships or referrals would best support Jennifer. So what could we do for Jennifer in the civilian world or with the partnerships that we've been building in Alaska? Special Victims Council. Domestic violence shelter, absolutely. Shelters, very true. Center, LGBT centers, hotlines. Hotlines are nationwide for the most part, and they are available and confidential through the military as well as through civilian online support groups. Big thing since the pandemic, there's lots more access. There's even online 12-step meetings. Defining what's safe. Everybody responds to trauma differently. Absolutely. These are going to be very, very individual decisions. Parents at their school, very creative, awesome. Local crisis center, domestic violence support groups, education. Yes, more independence might make Jennifer feel like she can access some of these resources and supports for herself. Thank you so much. So how could these SAPR professionals or the family advocacy program, if it's domestic violence, 211, yes, that's very good for housing support. How could military professionals and or civilian service providers work to improve access to support and services? Yes, CASA for the children, absolutely. Laurel House, okay, awesome. So how can these providers work to improve access to services? Allowing a choice. The more services and the more overlap, the more choice. Absolutely. Oh, a seminar. I'd love to hear more about that. Being more engaged in the community. That's true. LGBTQ identity is only one part of my identity. I also train dogs and I like to read. I'm in a book group, so I can find support in some of those other networks, making those strong connections. We know it's hard. They might be moving in a year, in 2 years, 3 years, but you're absolutely right. Thinking outside the box, volunteering and getting connected to parents and other people who might not even be LGBTQ plus can make somebody feel more part of the community. Awesome. Thank you so much. This is my contact information. I am more than happy to support you, whether that's dialoguing about a particular survivor, doing presentations, however I can help you, providing resources, things that we use in my agency. I am more than happy to help you at any time. I love that, a summit between agencies. And then this is the resource page that you will be receiving. So thank you so much.